Hey, we're live. It's July. It's the summer. I don't know what day it is anymore. Let's get
It's
back.
nearing the end of July.
Is it? Yeah, I guess it is kind of.
I guess
Usually we're
nearing the end of summer. Summer's almost gone, Rob.
no, 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 no. Let's not get crazy.
If you don't find it, there's no time. It's over.
Uh, yeah, right. So here we are in July, and we're going to be talking about black and white. I'm Rob Sylvan, Levi Sim, my usual Lightroom hangout buddy. And we have a very special guest, someone who we haven't had on the show before, but I've had the pleasure of seeing him teach a couple of times at Photoshop World. Fantastic guy. The audience loves him, and he's just a wealth of information. So Daniel Gregory's with us this month. So Daniel, tell us a little bit about you, where you are, and how you come to photography.
Well, thanks for the kind words. I really appreciate that. So I'm a fine art photographer. I live on Whidbey Island, which is about 35 miles north of Seattle. So it's a great little artist community on the south end of the island where I live, and so it's a pretty cool place. And I started in photography really young. I had a Kodak 110 camera and then the disc camera, and slowly worked my kind of way up. And I did photography all the way through high school and college. But then when I graduated college, I went and got a real job and kind of fell out of photography. And then my first job, though, when I moved to Seattle, was I did tech support for Adobe Photoshop.
Huh.
So Photoshop, which was basically the support was 3, 4, and 5. So I supported the Photoshop arena there. And at that time, decided to kind of get back into photography. And because I was supporting Photoshop and doing that every day, and digital photography kind of just started coming out, but I was like, oh, I'm in front of Photoshop all day at work. I ended up jumping back into film photography. So since I got serious about photography 15, 20 years ago, I started as a large format was kind of my piece. So the old Ansel Adams, put your head under the cover cameras. And so I still shoot an 8x10 view camera and a 4x5 camera, but love working with Photoshop just from that heritage of that. So been doing digital for probably since about 2003 or so. And my true first love in photography was black and white photography. So when we look back at the classic masters from Talbot and some of those people over the earliest years of photography through Helen Levitt and Roy DeCava, Ansel Adams, Weston, that whole generation was really my first love was in black and white. So
Awesome.
That's kind of my little history there.
So a question that hopefully will segue from that. So I know a lot of people who've gotten into photography have kind of gotten in on the digital side of that. Myself included. I mean, I'm old enough to have shot film because that's all there was. But for people who are really into photography, younger than me, they just move into digital. How do you kind of get into a black and white mindset when you're out with your camera? If you didn't have that kind of past in shooting only black and white film, how do you see or how do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. And even if you teach somebody shooting film, black and white film, it's the same basic problem, because color is very informative to our understanding of how to create space and relationships in a photograph. But to our eye, when the way the film interacts and when things get converted into black and white, they're converted into a tonal level. And so colors can oftentimes have the same basic relationship. So I'll show you real quick what I mean here. Let me do a screen share here. And now if we look here in Photoshop, you can see I've got kind of a basic color wheel here, and I've got the red, magenta, blue, cyan, green, and yellow. And these are the opposites of the color wheel. If I turn this into black and white, all of a sudden those colors start to look pretty close to the same.
Yeah.
And so, as a matter of fact, if we actually look right here on my info palette, I've got a grayscale value picker. The value of that yellow is 40%. The value of that green is 44%. The value of that magenta is 43%. So to a black and white photograph, when we convert it, those are only 1 degree apart, basically 1 percentage point apart. That actually makes the challenge of getting the image created more difficult. And that's one of the reasons that it's difficult when people first get started, because they see that green and that magenta and they're like, oh my gosh, those are really different. But to the black and white conversion, they're pretty close to the same. So what you have to start to train yourself to see is how tonally different are they? So is there a significant difference in the luminosity values of the greens, or is one more saturated or less saturated? Because if they have the same luminosity, same saturation, and they're close enough in how the camera responds to the spectrum, they'll actually line up pretty close to one another. And that's why in Lightroom, when we look at the black and white adjustment sliders, they basically, what they're moving is lighter or darker, and it's attempting to cause the reds to get redder or lighter so that the tones can start to separate. So the big challenge is, can I start to see things from a tonal perspective? And what I encourage people to do if they're going to be black and white, try to go into black and white, is try to imagine when they're taking the picture what they think is going to be brighter or darker in the scene when it converts to black and white, and then make some notes. And then when they go back to the computer and they put it into black and white, look back at your notes and be like, okay, I took a picture of this leaf and it had some green and red, and then there was this yellow bird on it. Which is going to be lighter or darker in there in that conversion? And that starts to help you see a little bit more and more what might actually happen when the conversion process starts.
Okay.
Do you ever so like here's my camera.
Monochrome?
Yeah, do you ever shoot monochrome mode?
I don't shoot in monochrome mode, just because of my background comes from, I learned on film, so I've just kind of learned that. I do encourage my students who are starting to shoot in monochrome as long as they're shooting raw files.
Right. Now, so one thing I like here is that I can change the color filter.
Yep. And then when you look at your image on the back, you can see monochromatically what's happening.
Right.
If you do that with a JPEG, you're kind of going to be SOL on the actual ability to edit that significantly.
Sure.
From a raw standpoint, it's a great way to learn, because you can come back in and pull that piece apart. The other piece that's nice about working with the raw file to create the black and white is you go into Lightroom, you create a virtual copy, you leave one in the color, the other one in the black and white, and then you can actually use the two side by side. And one of the great things in the new version of Lightroom, we got the reference photo.
Right.
And so I can bring up the reference photo in color and edit the one in black and white and actually kind of see side by side what's happening there. So if I can show you real quick how I would go about it.
Because I remember we got that, but I haven't used it that way.
Yeah.
Hey, and you know, while you're doing that setup, I forgot to say, I was so into getting the topic, to say, hey, thanks Photo Focus for having us. And also we're giving away 2 perfectly clear Lightroom plugins at the very end of our show. And the way that you get into winning one of those 2 plugins is to leave us a note, say hello in the comments, and that's on the YouTube channel. So if you're watching on the Photo Focus page, just click on over to the YouTube live stream, and on the right there's a little chat box, and you could just, people are already adding their comments saying hello, and that's all you need to do is say hello. If you want to ask a question, we love questions, so definitely ask questions, but definitely chime in there so we know that you're there and get you entered into the drawing. So sorry, Daniel.
No worries. I'm excited somebody's going to win something. That's a great plug-in to get to work with. So can you guys, if I zoom my screen, does my zoom tool work on the Hangout?
No, it doesn't.
All right. It'd be great if it did, but okay. So I've got an image here and I'm in the develop module. And then down there where you've got your ability to change from a loop view to the comparison view, in that lower left corner, there's an R and an A now. And that's the reference photo view. So what happens is if I click on that, this is my active photo, and then I get an option here to set a reference photo. So I can grab any other photograph and drag it up here and get the reference photo in the active. And the original intention for this was if you were, say, editing a series of portraits from a wedding and you want to make sure, and you get one of them done right, and you want it to be consistent across the next 6 or 7 edits, you could bring up one photo and use it as the reference as you're working on the edits on the other side, because the active photo can still have all of any edit I make in the module, in the development module, shows up. So it gave me a really nice point of reference to compare back to as I'm making similar edits across all the photographs. So that's what it was, its original purpose. But what I like it for is if I've got this image and I'm going to work with it in black and white, I can make it its own reference.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to create a virtual copy. And where's my, there it is. So now my virtual copy is my active photo. Now, if I go into black and white, now I can see the colors that exist in the original image, and I can work in black and white. So you see in this conversion right here, automatically that issue I was talking about, the red and the green.
Yeah, they just disappeared in the same tone.
It disappeared. So I know now if I come in here and I want to adjust the green values and the red values, I can start to get some separation in there. Now, the interesting thing about color, you know, and if you've used these sliders before, the targeted adjustment tool is going to really help you in black and white.
Yeah.
Because if I come in here and I'll reset this, you know, if I zoom in on this image here, you know, that's got, looks like red to me, but that's actually got a red orange cast in it. So if I come in here and actually want to make that adjustment, I can get those sliders to go. And that was mostly a red yellow in this case where I clicked. So now I can get my greens brighter, come in and target my adjustment down, and I can start to darken certain leaves, or I could do the opposite and brighten those leaves up and darken my greens.
Yeah, and the trouble is if you do it without the targeted adjustment tool, I feel like you start separating the colors more.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like in that range here is actually a little red, a little yellow, a little orange, and it's really quick to get a digital artifact to show up.
Yeah, it starts looking chunky, right? And starts
chunky,
looking,
and you get weird edges, and then all the other work you do around sharpening and any other effects that get applied get compounded, because this work to move the slider that far is an aggressive adjustment.
Yeah.
And so, and we can talk in a little bit about how we kind of hide the beauty of black and white because of its history. We learned to look at black and white photographs with grain and with a little bit of chunkiness, and that's how we learned to observe them. It was one of the issues for black and white photography in particular when it started to move into really high-end printing on the digital side.
Right.
People said, oh, it looks digital, was their statement all the time. Oh, your photograph looks digital, it's got digital. And the problem was it was a pure capture, a pure image. It didn't have any of the grain and sort of scratches that we got out of the traditional film photograph. So we come into a photograph and we do all this work, and it came out a little without those artifacts. Our eye had been trained for decades to see images a different way.
Wow.
It's interesting in about another 20 or 30 years when people are used to looking at the digital output on how they're going to respond to the historical images going back.
Yeah, that's a very interesting consideration I hadn't realized before. That's cool.
Yeah, so that reference thing has been a huge saver for me in looking at the processing piece.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
The other piece to your monochrome piece, just to really make sure we hit that nail on the head. From a color standpoint, the only way we actually get to process in the digital arena is to have the color information there. So what happens when we bring an image, a raw file in, we capture the red channel, the green channel, and the blue channel in various amounts. If a program automatically converts to grayscale, it takes and mixes a certain percentage each one of those channels, builds the composite for the grayscale, and throws everything else away.
Right.
And we've thrown away the data. So if all of a sudden I was like, God, I really want to change and brighten that green up, and the data's gone, it's not there. But what's interesting is I can show you the other questions I get asked is, what is the right color space? Does it matter? Black and white. This is I got to do a little weird hoop here to get the menu to appear in this program. Come on, give me my menu.
Can you make that bigger as well?
Yeah, well, it's got a menu I need to have show up, and it's one of them. This annoying little program. You can see it flash on, and then it disappears, and then it eventually comes back. There it is. Okay. Okay, so this program right here, what you see on the screen, that's the LAB color space. So this program is called ColorThink, and what it does is it allows you to map in color spaces and photographs you take to see how do they exist within the gamut that exists within a color volume.
Huh.
And so I'm going to get rid of the Apple one because that was a different experiment. So if I go ahead here and bring up the Adobe RGB color space, This is the color gamut, the color volume of the Adobe RGB color space. I'm going to change that. I'll leave that as a flat, and I'm going to load in Pro Photo. So
wow.
Pro Photo is the wireframe there. So you could see how much more color information exists in Pro Photo than Adobe RGB.
Yeah.
What I've got here is this image right here is a black and white photograph. So if I come back here, I'm going to click on and show you the gamut of that black and white photograph. It exists as these little dots. Come on, zoom in. Oops, zoom in. These little jagged edges along that line.
That center line is it?
That's it, because black and white exist on the luminosity of an image. So the actual color space is confined into that luminosity area. So people always ask me, well, do I still have to shoot Pro Photo if black and white is really only that center luminosity line? And it goes back to just like it does when I'm working with anything in color. If I've got this much more space to move the tonal relationship, I can separate my greens from my magentas if I'm in a bigger color space than if I'm working in the smaller color space. So while a black and white image is fully contained in sRGB, Adobe RGB, and Pro Photo, the ability to manipulate the colors to get what I want, I still want the biggest color space possible. So if you're going to start working in black and white, you don't want to cheat yourself by hard panning yourself into a smaller color space if you don't have to.
That's cool. Hey, can you also add, can we see sRGB on there too?
Yeah, absolutely.
Out of curiosity. I was working on an article about this.
Yeah, so if I bring up sRGB, and it's going to be on the inside here. So I'm going to turn off Pro Photo, turn off Adobe RGB.
Okay.
Here's sRGB.
Yep. And you can see the shadow down below. That's pretty cool too.
And I'll flip to that in a second. So here's, so there's sRGB versus Adobe RGB.
Okay.
And then if I go to Pro Photo.
Bam.
Okay. And if I go and look, we can look at that graph in 2D. So this internal, let me zoom out here so we get the full piece. I got sRGB, Adobe RGB, and then Pro Photo. And then the grid is the LAB color space, which is one of our largest color spaces we work with and actually exceeds human vision. Which is one of those weird things. People are like, how can you have a color exceed human vision? And it's a mathematical construct of a color that exists out there that we can't see. But
awesome.
It's the benefit of math to do your color interpretation.
Okay, so Daniel, I have a question for you then about photographing with black and white film. Yep. Or like my camera, I can alter the color filters. How do you explain what a color filter does?
Okay, so in the black and white film, the films were most of the big ones were they're either orthochromatic or panchromatically responding to the wavelength frequencies that exist. So the visible spectrum covers from like 490 nanometers up to about 700 nanometers, and we have the reds, greens, blues, yellows, indigos, and violets of that spectrum get split, and they're at very specific nanometers is where color exists. And so if you have a color filter, so this is a red, probably 23 filter. And what happens is when you put a filter in front of the camera when you were shooting film, is it blocked up the light that was coming in. So it blocked a certain wavelength of light coming into the image. And a filter will lighten its own color and darken the opposite. So if I used that red filter, it would it would lighten anything that was red, and then it would darken anything on its opposite. And this is where you kind of had to learn the color wheel, even as a black and white photographer. Because what people used the red filter for is they wanted to make really dark skies, really those big Ansel Adams, the poofy white clouds and that jet black sky. Those were done with red filters. And so everybody's like, oh, red's opposite is blue. Well, red's opposite is actually cyan.
Right.
And so those cyan is what gets blocked up to make the dark. And there's an incredible amount of cyan in the sky. And even more so, the higher you get in altitude, the more cyan the sky is. So Ansel Adams at 8, 9, 10,000 feet he got an even more dramatic effect with the filter than he did for somebody who was shooting at sea level.
Interesting.
And those filters came in yellow, green, red, orange, blue. And you put those on there because in Photoshop or in Lightroom, I can adjust the contrast afterwards. I can go in and paint a different color on something and be able to separate it. But with film, what you got was what you got. So if I looked at a scene and I had a red apple and a green apple and they looked identical to the film because those tones, so it's a green apple and a red apple, they look the same. In Lightroom or Photoshop, well, I'm just going to go make the red brighter and the green darker, and now I have two apples. Well, if I shot that with film, the film was like, those apples look the same. So I put that filter on, and I have to do that at the point of capture. I had to make that change. Well, with digital, we don't have to make that change. We can make that change afterwards. So it definitely lightens up the gear bag a little bit.
Yeah.
And saves some money having to buy filters.
In fact, maybe I can even show you right here real quick. I've got this, there's some red writing on this paper.
Little bright.
Too bright. There. How about there? You see that? Oh, there we go.
Now I see it. Yeah, that's so cool.
There's that line of red, and it virtually disappears in relation to the rest of the paper. Whereas that green spot stays nice and dark, but that line of red writing right there in the center.
Didn't they used to have a kid's toy that was like that with
like the Cracker Jack box?
Yeah.
the secret decoder.
Yeah, exactly.
Red cellophane.
Right with this magic pen.
Yeah, and there's a field of blue and red dots.
Yep.
And you couldn't really make anything out until you looked at it through the red thing, and then all the red dots turned apparently white.
Yep, and then that let you read the message.
In the same tone as the white, and then you read the purple dot or the blue dots.
Yeah, and those blue dots actually had a bunch of cyan in them to make them have that contrast. Yeah.
So when we're kind of just bringing it back to Lightroom, so now that we've captured some images, like what would be, with the intention of making a black and white final image, or at least a black and white version, because we have ultimate infinite number of iterations. What's kind of the beginning steps now that you've captured it, you brought it into Lightroom? Do you just treat it like a regular photograph, or do you do things differently?
Yeah, so my workflow, if I know the image for sure is going to go into black and white, which is, probably 60, 70% of the time when I capture it, I'm thinking out in the field like, oh, this will be a cool black and white. But I always start with a virtual copy. So if I'm going to go into create a black and white, I'm just going to go ahead and create the virtual copy. One of the things I then do in my master Lightroom catalog, I then even have a smart object, not a smart object. I have a smart filter that basically looks for anything that's a virtual copy and has black and white treatment on it.
You can do that? I didn't know you could do that.
That was a great
treatment.
That was a great face.
Holy God.
That was just
so I go in and so I can pull all my black and white images together. So that's one of the reasons I do that. Just from an organization standpoint, I'm then not having to hunt and peck for those pieces. And then so if I go through if I grab a workflow here, my workflow
right now that does that smart collection.
You want to see a smart collection?
I'm going to make a smart collection that does
that.
I think so. It's revolutionized my whole Lightroom life.
One of the things that before I jump in and actually show this, let me I'll get out of my reference here. Certain images I don't ever put into black and white. This is the gum wall in Seattle, which they've cleaned and then we've put gum back on because the city doesn't have the choice of whether that's the gum wall.
Right.
But I waited for about an hour for somebody to do something on the gum wall, and I could not have picked hot pink bubblegum sweatshirt and tennis shoes in that gesture in a million years. If I take that into black and white, I lose what is really, I mean, I get the texture of the wall, but I lose to me what was really kind of the essence, which is the bubblegum.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily think long and hard about certain images, like this has to be in color, but other images, like I'll grab this one. So this is one, when I took this, I absolutely saw in black and white, and I'm going to show you what I saw, and then I'll kind of go through kind of how I processed it. this is actually what I saw.
Yeah.
So in the field, I saw this heart-shaped rock right here that I didn't really want to emphasize, but I saw this shape right here that kind of looked like angel wings or two people laying down, and it kind of had this metaphoric feel to it. And then I wanted somebody, if they came in and looked, to be like, oh my gosh, that other rock looks like a heart. And it was this idea that in nature, we're nature's muse on some level, just like she's ours. So I was kind of playing with that element. So I knew I was going to go into black and white. So I create a virtual copy. And then I kind of have the same workflow, basic workflow, if I'm doing color or black and white. I'm going to come down and do my camera calibration. And in this case, I picked the landscape calibration because I wanted these really deep, heavy shadows. One of the things that makes a black and white is really about tone, light, and contrast. So I wanted those deeper shadows so I could build contrast off of that deep black point. So that's why I chose the camera landscape piece. The next thing I do is I always come up and enable a lens profile correction. And the reason I do that, particularly with my black and white photographs, is one of the things that profile correction corrects for is a vignette in the lens because of the way the lenses are crafted. So if you look at this image, you'll see it subtly remove a vignette from the corners. I want to put a vignette back into all my black and white images, but I want to be in control of the vignette. So I use the profile correction to remove any possibility of a vignette being there. The next place I come is my detail slider, and I'm going to do my sharpening at this point. And this is just the capture sharpening. And then this is the interesting part for black and white. So normally I would come into an image and I would do some pretty aggressive noise reduction if it needed it. But noise has a little bit of a feel that grain did. So in the old film days, grain was actually what captured the light and it gave a pattern to the actual image. So I'm not always aggressively going to remove the noise from my images that are going to go into black and white because I might use that as a way to accentuate a certain part of the image. So oftentimes I actually turn off my noise reduction, and normally I would do that early in the process. But for my black and white stuff, I kind of leave that off initially, and then I'll do my sharpening. Since this is capture sharpening, I'm not going to do a very aggressive one. And normally I would come in and mask out any of my really smooth areas. But in this case, it's so texturized, and I kind of want that texture to come out and contrast to come out. I wouldn't mask this particular image. But on an image like this, if I'm going to come in and sharpen this one, I would have masked this out to something like that to get the sky and not to be sharpened because I want the smooth gradation of the tones to not be interrupted by anything actually being sharpened there. That little step right there happens with color for me, happens with black and white. The next thing I'm going to do is go up to the basic panel, and I do this for black and white and color as well. The next thing I'm going to do is set a black point and a white point because that's going to give me the contrast range available in the image as it's processed. So I could do that a couple of ways. I can hold down, I can just move it by random and kind of pick what I want. But what I don't want to do is inadvertently introduce black and crush any tone and any texture in the photograph. So I don't want to just slide this to where I think it's going to look good. So I'm going to hold down the Option key. And if I do that, you can kind of see where that little black dot appears in the center of the photograph. And that's telling me that's kind of where my black point is actually right in there. And I don't know if you can see it through the YouTube Hangout, but there's a tiny bit of texture back in there. And then right there where the hand is actually the black point. So I've got that set. The same thing with the white slider. If I hold down the Option key, I can move that up. And now I'm starting to get some specular highlight. Move a little bit more to get past the specular highlight. And now I've got the contrast range of my image. One of the cool things they introduced a few editions ago, if I hold down the Shift key and click on whites and click on blacks, it will automatically set my white and black point. So I don't have to hold down the slider to do it. It's pretty good at selecting it, but I always check it after it does it just to see, like, you grabbed something. What did you grab at a white point or a black point? For that, I get that white point and black point done. And the next thing I'm going to go to is exposure. And this point, this is mostly affecting the midtones, little slide in the shadow, little slide in the black point. But I'm basically looking for, at this point, what do I kind of see as a range of light? What is the range of quality? And this is where, at the point I'm ready to move to exposure, I'm going to go into black and white. So I'll hit the V key and put that into black and white at this point. Because the other ones, I don't need to see it at a black and white. I could do it at the very beginning, but until I'm starting to set the base exposure for the image, I don't worry too much about it. And in this case, what I'm looking for is an exposure that's going to give me as much detail as possible, as many tones as possible, so that I can then come in and now work with the image. So if I've got enough luminance values that I can still lighten and darken, and you can see on this one, you're starting to see the development of that wing on that edge, but not on this one. So now I'm starting to get a little bit closer to where I want. I can see some detail down here in the shadows. And now with that exposure being opened up, you're starting to see some of that texture that was in those little rocks. So now what I'm going to do is come in and look at a little highlight adjustment and just see, like, okay, if I push my highlights up, do I get any help from that? And same thing with the shadow, like, oh, if I can press that down, what do I lose in shadow detail? So in this case, the shadow is really just affecting the upper area here and this area in here, because everything else is in the mid-tone. So one of the things about black and white photography is when you read about it, they talk about the zone system, and the zone system is used actually for printing. Zone 0 is pure black, zone 10 is paper white, and zone 5 was middle gray. So it was where the dead middle was. Your most important shadow with detail was zone 3. So a shadow with full detail is called zone 3, and a shadow with full detail is zone 7. So I use this try that sentence again. I use the shadow slider to try to figure out a zone 3 placement. So in here, that's pretty dark. That's actually a zone 2. But this, I want to make sure I keep all my texture with. So if I move that shadow down, I start to lose some texture in those rocks. So I'll bring that down where I still am going to have texture and preserve the detail there. And the same thing with the highlight. This is going to be my important highlight. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I don't blow out the details in those rocks, that I can still see every little transition there. So that gets my base exposure set. And then I'm going to come down and monkey a little bit with clarity. And in this image, you can see clarity gets a pretty aggressive treatment on the image. I normally wouldn't push clarity that hard because it creates some strange halos and artifacts, because it's basically a mid-tone contrast adjustment. So it's going to over accentuate the middle contrast separation. But for this image, if we go back and look at the black and white version, all that grittiness I actually want. So I am actually, in this case, I think, where am I? I lost my image. Where'd you go? There it is. I'm going to come in and actually crank the clarity up to 100 on this, because the edge effect in this case is going to help me create more texture into the image. So everything you ever read says don't put clarity to 100, but I want all that gritty texture.
My only rule is don't put it to minus 100.
Yeah.
Actually, my rule is don't turn it to minus at all. But
yeah, unless I'm doing a self-portrait and I want to kind of look pretty, I go to minus. The next piece is I can come in now and start to look a little bit about what these sliders might do. But this image, if we go back to the original, was pretty flat from a color standpoint. I got a little blue-green out here. So for this image, I'm going to have to go what I call kind of old school. I don't have a lot of use of the mixer here to change. So most of the work here is done with brushes and gradients. So in the old traditional darkroom, if we wanted to change an image, we had to dodge and burn. So dodging was reducing light and burning was adding light. And we had little wands and we used our hands, and you basically moved stuff around over the paper and you did this little dance. Because those old black and white photographs had dozens and dozens of steps to process. So that's the other thing about black and white photography is it's not a conversion to black and white and you're done. Actually, it takes a lot more work most of the time to manipulate a black and white photograph than a color one. So in this case, I'm going to come in and grab a brush, and I'm just going to go ahead and I drop the exposure down. When I'm working with a brush, since I can always come back and change it later, I always want to see where I'm painting. So I just use a really deep brush. Okay. And then I'm going to go on ahead and just work that brush until I get that edge done. In this case, I'm getting close. So now I'll kind of start to back my exposure off to see, well, okay, how much of it do I have painted? So I'll come in and get myself painted. And now I'm going to go ahead and start to set that where I want it. So I'm going to go ahead and get that up a little bit brighter. And then I'm going to punch the contrast to try to bring in some of those blacks. And then I'm going to absolutely bring in my black. So I dropped the black slider all the way because I want to accentuate those lines.
Wow.
Same thing. I want to accentuate the shadow a little bit. In this case, I've kind of got a highlight blowout. So now I'm going to probably bring my highlight down just a tiny bit to try to bring some of this texture back in there. Every adjustment I make, whether I'm doing color, black and white, gets a different brush. Because I've learned if I now come over here and brush this, and then I'm like, oh, I want to change that.
Right.
I'm also changing that. So everything gets a new brush. So I'll grab a new brush.
It's a good workflow tip.
Come in and I paint that one. I'll kind of reduce that out. So I kind of get it in the ballpark. And then again, I make a similar adjustment. Come in, drop my black down, bring a highlight down a little bit, shadow. So what I'm actually using this adjustment brush for, and this really aggressive kind of contrast shadow adjustment, is I'm trying to basically create a sharpening effect to sharpen the rocks up. I take a gradient, bring in a gradient. So just to expedite some speed, I'd come in on those. And you saw I dropped all 4 gradients without making an adjustment, because now I can kind of see what's going on around the image. Now I'll come back and start to adjust these one by one, because I could start to see the effect. Because the thing about the tools that work, whether you're in Photoshop or Lightroom, is they're cumulative. So they're going to build on top of one another. So I kind of want to get the base structure of the image done first and then come back and refine. So
I like that. I like that. It's easier to erase sometimes than it is to get it looking great initially.
99% of the time, the fastest way to edit, particularly in Lightroom, is to go too far and back it off.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
There's some adjustments we would do in Photoshop where it's actually easier to do an additive approach. But for the most part, yeah, too far and come back. So there's, in this one, there's better brush work, more refinement of the edges, but you can see there pretty quickly I can kind of get back to the same image. The other piece I do is I'll come in, like if I take this image has been kind of stylized, we take this image. This one was processed in Photoshop because it was really flat with the light, and I wanted to make sure I could preserve a bunch of texture. But if I take an image like this, which is a pretty monochromatic image, if I go through my basic black and white workflow, I'd get somewhere in here. I just want to show you with this one in particular, the effect of a vignette. So I'll make sure the lens correction's on. So if there is a vignette, it's been pulled out. So under the effects panel is where I can apply a post-crop vignette. And I can come in here, and if I drag the slider, I introduce white as the vignette. If I bring it to the left, I introduce a dark vignette. And then midpoint defines how big the gradient's going to be on the thing. Roundness, how square or round should it be? The feather, which is kind of the most important. That's my favorite vignette. A feathering effect of how kind of broad should it be. And then this highlight slider is how much of the highlight should be protected that are in the vignette.
I love that.
If I make a really heavy vignette like this, it looks really artificial because none of it's affecting the luminosity of those tones equally. But if I move the highlight slider, I can still have the vignette there and some of the highlights start to bleed through, and it creates a more natural looking vignette in the process. So in this case, if I come back in, I'll just reset this whole piece. Give a little reset to the feather.
Quick style, I think. Yeah.
There we go. So now if I come in and I'm just going to drop just a little vignette down to about there. So just like a minus 25, 30. And my highlights, I'm going to go ahead and bring up to about 30. Now, if I turn that on and off, okay, what the vignette does is it directs my eye, darkens the tones out. And so I'm being compressed into the center of the frame because our eyes go to points of high contrast first in the image. So in this image, your eye is going to come back here because it's, people always say, oh, you look at the brightest part of a photograph first. Well, you actually go to the point of highest contrast first. So back here, because this is bright and it's got the blacks, your eye goes back here. Then it's going to come over and catch this next. If I've got stuff on the edge, if I turn the vignette off, you can get out here on these edges. And if you get to the edge of a photograph, you'll leave a photograph. So that's why we always want the eye to lead through the frame and back and explore the different planes. Particularly with black and white, if I come in and add a little bit of a vignette, as you start to drift to the edge of the frame, it gets a little darker, and then it's going to pull your eye back into the middle of the frame. So if you can do the vignette and make it so that I don't know you've applied one, it's a great way to help me stay contained within the actual black and white image.
Excellent. Hey, we had a question for you too.
Cool.
You did the when you press Shift and double click on the blacks and whites sliders, and they automatically set the darkest and brightest point. How do you know? So the question is, does that work in Lightroom 6?
I believe that does work in Lightroom 6.
It does. Do you have any idea how far back it goes? I feel like it worked in Lightroom 4.
I want to say, yeah, it was like 4 or 5 or something like that. They introduced it, and then they didn't tell anybody about it.
It was a secret.
It was a secret, and then all of a sudden everybody found it in 6, and so everybody thinks it's a 6 feature. But yeah, I think you're right, Levi. I think it's back pretty far in the history.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, the option key's been there I think since the beginning almost.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really handy one too. So when you press the option key, you can see the things. Also, if you just press the J key, you get the highlight and clipping warnings pop up and show you what's blown and what's clipped.
Yeah, the other piece that's interesting, just as a random tip, if I come in like to the detail slider and I hold down the Alt key on a PC or the option key on a Mac. Oh, it's a black and white image. Okay. I hold down that Alt or Option key. It changes to a grayscale image because it's actually easier to see the amount of sharpening that's happening on a grayscale image, because what we're looking at is the effect of the edge to add we're basically lightening the light side of the pixel and darkening the dark side of the pixel, and it's easier to see that effect in grayscale. If I hold down the Shift key again, or the Alt or Option key again on the radius, you can actually see how much of a halo is being built. Same thing with the detail slider. The detail slider below 50 reduces halos, and above 50 acts as a high pass filter. So there's two options there, but I at least can see the effect by holding it down. And then the masking builds the on-the-fly mask for that. So I got that Alt Option key here, but I've learned in Lightroom to click on the Option key and drag any slider.
Yeah.
Because it actually works on an insane, I can't get it to come up. What, catch up, computer? It works on almost every slider, gives you a different view. Oh, I'm on the brush, that's why. So on the exposure slider, if I start to drag this, it will actually start to tell me where clipping is occurring, even in the exposure slider. So highlight slider, shadow slider. So it's amazing how many places that Option key comes into play. So over the years, I've just learned, like, I don't know what that tool does. I'm going to go ahead and hold down the Option key and see if it does something different. And it's amazing how many times it does that.
Yeah. That's cool. That's really cool.
The other piece from a black and white perspective, and I owe the very dear and near Julianne Cost for this tip.
You joined us just a couple months ago for the show.
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and just paint this random effect in here on this leaf, even though it's color. And I'll make the exposure. I'll make a contrast adjustment. I'll make a highlight adjustment. So this is a horrible
Hey,
down.
Hang on, Daniel. I think
the name of my brush.
does it sound bad to you, Rob? Okay, good.
Yeah, no, he was fading out.
Hey, Daniel, I think we freaked out your computer with all those demonstration options. We didn't hear anything you just said. In fact, I'm afraid.
Okay, I'll back up. Let me
There
So we saw you.
Okay.
Tell us what you just set these crazy settings.
Okay, yep. So I'll go back and now remake some crazy settings here. So I've got that brush painted. I create some crazy settings. If up here in this upper corner, I've got the effects and then the type of brush I'm using, there's this little triangle that comes down. I had never ever clicked on that triangle. I don't know why, but I never had. I always just assumed it was something in the interface, like to tell me this is where the numbers are. But if you click on that, it will actually then roll everything up, and this is the amount of how strong that effect's being applied. So I can come in and actually, after the fact, kind of change how strong all of those changes are being applied. So it kind of works like an opacity filter almost in Photoshop.
Yeah.
But that little thing lives in the gradient tool. It lives in the radial tool. Like, so if you get everything in there and you're like, oh, it's really close, but I wish it was just a little stronger or a little weaker in its application, and you've moved 6 sliders, then you're going to come back and move 6 sliders and try to fix it. Just click on that and move a little adjustment of that amount might actually help with the.
Oh, and if you wanted to do more than it was, you could just duplicate the filter and then reduce it.
Yes.
Cool.
Good tip.
Hey, you're doing some great ones. We need to, hit it, Rob.
Well, I was just saying, we forgot to say about 15 minutes ago that we're halfway through. So now we only have about 15 minutes left. So if you want to get,
man,
yeah, time flew by. So if you want to get entered into the giveaway at the end, make sure you leave a comment, a question. We love the questions. Certainly about black and white conversion, Lightroom general are also welcome. And that's it.
Yeah, Roger just said, we're enjoying this. Keep up the good work. And that kind of a comment enters Roger for.
See, that's all it takes.
That's all it takes.
That's how easy we are. Levi, did you figure out how to do that smart collection that Daniel mentioned?
Well, I mean, I know how to do it. Should I show how to do it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will show how to do that. So let's share my.
Because the virtual copy part is the tricky part.
Yeah. So this is cool. You can see my screen now?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, so when you come to collections down here, you can add a collection, and I want to create a smart collection. And then I'm going to name the smart collection. I'm going to call it black and white.
Clever.
And we'll just leave it there. And then we want to match the following rules. We want to change this from rating. And we want to go down here. Where are these? Let's see. Oh, develop. Develop? Is that where we want to go, Daniel?
Yes.
Yeah. And I want to say has adjustments.
Or you can go to treatment.
Treatment.
Or treatment?
Yep.
Yeah, go treatment.
Element treatment is black and white. Look at that. Or color.
Yeah.
All right. And then I could add another rule that says is a file. Where's the file type come in?
No, this is the tricky part. Go up to copy name. Under file name.
Copy name.
Yeah.
No.
And isn't empty.
Names. Copy.
Well, just put isn't empty because you might have changed it to something else. If you're someone who enters a copy name for your virtual copies. So
you enter a copy name for your virtual copy?
No. Well, sometimes I do, yeah. But go over to the previous field there where it says contains and change that to isn't empty.
Isn't empty.
That's all you got to do.
Uh-huh. If I hit create, let's see what happens. We're going to get this new filter, this new collection that is just populating itself. Look at this.
So it should be all virtual copy. So there isn't, this is the point, that's why I wanted to show it, because there isn't you would think there was a thing that just said is a virtual copy, but there isn't. You have to kind of cheat around it. So when you make a virtual copy, it enters in the copy name field, copy 1, copy 2, copy 3. Otherwise, that copy field is empty unless you're like the one person who ever uses that field for other things.
And if you're that person, then you need to figure out another field. Yeah, and the nice part about that way too is because if you do a soft proof and then it makes its copy, it will also still show up there. So your soft proofing virtual copies also are in there. So if you've got a printing thing or whatever, it's
oh, good. Okay.
And the other thing to keep in mind with that smart collection is that if you create a black and white any other way, such as through some third-party plugin, or if your JPEGs are black and white or whatever, those aren't going to get captured. It's only
created black and whites.
Only created black and whites in Lightroom using either the HSL black and white panel or by clicking the black and white button up at the top of where it says treatment. If you just take saturation and zero it out, or minus 100 it, I should say minus 100 it, that won't count.
That won't count. Yeah. The other one too is if you've got if you actually don't make the virtual copy and you work on the original as the black and white, it doesn't want to show up unless the copy field's entered there. So you create another collection that's black and white originals.
Right.
And then you can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's kind of fun, makes you think, but very, very useful. There is a virtual copy filter in the library filter, but for whatever reason, it's not
for whatever reason, all the pictures I'm showing are not actually connected to my computer right now.
So the other thing I did want to briefly talk about, which of course I obviously can't demo, but I did want to talk a little bit about printing. So because for black and white printing, there's a lot of choices and a lot of options, and Canon. So for the most part, people are printing on a Canon printer, they're printing on an Epson printer.
Right.
And I don't want to have a religious discussion of Canon versus Epson, because they both have done something that's important to actually creating black and white. So everybody was looking for the holy grail of creating these beautiful black and white images. And what most people are going to do is what they've been taught, which is to go into the print module, select your image, go down there, pick your paper profile, and then go on ahead and print. And you will get a very nice black and white photograph. However, Epson and Canon both have spent ungodly amounts of money and time and engineering to put into their print drivers black and white printing modes. So in the Epson world, and I'm an Epson printer, so it's the advanced black and white option, and I'll show you where that is in the print driver in a second.
Yes, please.
And in Canon's, it's still an advanced black and white mode, but I, for the life of me, don't know what they call it because they have so many different printers and I don't own them. So it is the same basic process. You're going to choose the same basic options, but in the Canon driver is going to be the option to enable a advanced black and white option. And they may call it black and white printing, but it's in a similar section for the driver. The reason to do that is, in the printing world, what we're trying to do is use and maximize the gray inks and then a little bit of some of the other inks to separate the tonal relationships in the image as much as possible. But we want the purity of the grays and the blacks. So they built these print drivers engineered to work specifically on black and white images. So as the luminosity information is sent from Lightroom to the printer, it then is able to translate that into the right tones that the printer can generate to get a better image. So it's a little bit counterintuitive in terms of like, oh, I have the right paper profile, I want to do this. But what you're going to want to do is just a little tweak in how you think about it, and you'll be surprised. And when you first start, you're going to put the print side by side if you do this, and you're not going to see a huge difference. But as you start to do it more and more, you'll learn what's possible within the print driver, that it's able to actually work with certain images. And it actually is a little different. And the difference between a good print and a great print is about 2%. So this is going to get you that last 2-3%. So let me share my screen real quick. Okay, so if I take this image, I'll grab a black and white image here. I'm going to go into the print dialog box. Over here, I've got my color management, and in here's where I would normally come in and choose my paper. So the exhibition fiber on Epson's a beautiful paper. Canson Rag Photographique is a gorgeous black and white paper. So there's a number of black and white papers that are just stunning. So you normally would come in and choose the profile, but for black and white printing, you're going to choose Manage by Printer. When I then click on and engage the printer, if you're on an Epson, you're going to come down to the printer settings. And under basic here, I've got a print mode, which is the AccuPhoto HDR. This is the color version. So if I didn't have a paper profile, like people have given me paper, I don't know what it is, I could use this print mode to print color and get a reasonably good color managed workflow. But if I choose advanced black and white, I'm now actually got a black and white image here. This is actually Greg Gorman's photograph. What's happening now is I'm getting a purity of the black ink going to the paper. I make a couple of other changes. All my color stuff's printed at 1440. My black and white is printed at 2880. And when I was working on a Canon for a test a while back, it was at the highest DPI that the Canon did as well. The color doesn't need the higher output of the dot gain. The black and white, I do think, has a benefit there. High speed is fine. That's just a lot of print head to print back and forth. And then I usually click on finest detail, which is going to slow it down, but just give me a little bit more dot work there. Then in the advanced color settings, one of the things that's really kind of cool in here is I can come in here and say, oh, I want a sepia print, a warmer print, a cooler print, a neutral print. Most people choose neutral because they've done that work in Lightroom or Photoshop. And then this toning here is basically applying a curve adjustment into the image. So it's allowing you to come in and make some subtle adjustments in the print process to deal with how the image is going to respond tonally to the way the print works. There's some really big math behind these. It's like this is a 1.8 gamma curve. This is a 2.2 gamma curve correction. But if you're familiar with gamma adjustments and levels, this is basically a gamma adjustment. This little box down here. Sorry, yeah. What was that?
What do you recommend there then?
I'm usually on dark or darker is usually what I go with. I find the normal actually creates just it flattens the image out a little too much for me. And the darkest I feel like blocks up my shadows too much, and I would have to go back and redo some work in soft proofing to fix it. So I usually print with dark or darker. And then this little wheel down here, these are all the colors. So if I move this around and you look in that little sample photo, you can see the toning happening. So what this is going to do is actually lay in a little bit of color ink. So if I do this, my print actually comes out pretty green and would come out pretty yellow here. One of the other things, if you get to be really nerdy about this, Mac Holbert, who's images, Mac's one of the top printers ever for digital work. Mac's done the work to know that, like, oh, if you're printing on exhibition fiber, you set a 4.4 there because exhibition fiber's paper is a little cold. You put in a 4.4, it actually adds a little bit of warmth into the highlight, so it more neutralizes out the print. So if you really get into printing, you've got some control in here. And Canon has a similar thing in their print driver that allows you to actually come in and make those adjustments. So whatever you're doing, I would just recommend you come in and use the advanced black and white option or the print drive, print to printer, and use its black and white engine, Canon or Epson. You'll be really surprised at how much better your black and white photographs come out.
Cool. That's an awesome tip.
Yeah, I just found it in the Canon as well. I've got a Canon, and so, but it doesn't seem like there's that.
Your screen, then people could see that.
That's a good idea. All right, so share my screen, and so same thing. You click here on printer, and then here under this drop-down menu, choose the color options. And then, not the color options, quality media, and then choose black and white photo print. And you can change the high quality. And this, I feel like my large format printer had more options than this.
Yeah,
but this is a desktop, the Pro 10, and it doesn't, I don't think it has as many options as my 24 and 48-inch printers used to have.
Yeah, mine's the same way. The bigger my printer, the more stuff it tells it can do. I think that's just to make me feel good about how much the ink cost.
Yeah,
exactly.
So there we are. Now we're in straight black and white, which I like because I'm pretty sure it's not going to waste any color in there too.
Yeah, the Canons are really good. So one of the things that when Canon there's a printing tool you use if you're doing high end and you really get into black and white printing called a quad tone rip. And it's called a quad tone because it basically is going to grab each of the 4 inks. You can apply a custom curve into the ink and blah, blah, blah. There's some nerd stuff around that. And Canon's print driver actually has a stripped down version of a quad tone rip in it.
Wow.
When they first started doing black and white testing on the Canons, I was like, these have a richness that we would see in the analog darkroom. couldn't figure out like what is Canon really doing underneath that, because it just had this look of a little bit of a selenium tone. And the printer broke one day halfway through a print, so like heads got jammed, so we had to stop and do all the work to get the paper out. And we noticed there was this tiny little bit of cyan being printed on the underneath the grays, so the cyan line was there first, and we realized that what was kind of giving it that effect was this little bit of coolness underneath was giving that effect of the selenium tone. And so yeah, those print engineers are geniuses when it comes to figuring this stuff out. So if we actually use their tools, we do get a big boost off of that.
That's cool. So it is using some cyan, probably.
Probably a little cyan in there. There's probably a little magenta in there. Yeah.
Also, I mean, how big a deal do you think it is to have the multiple colors of black?
Oh my! If you're dealing with 256 tones of gray,
yeah,
and I have black ink,
right?
Yeah.
I get like 5. But I have black, light black, light black. That was the game changer. I mean, that was really for people who tried to print 10 years ago and they're like, nope, it's not, the quality's not there.
Right.
It really is a step forward. The other question I get asked a lot is, can I do a black and white digital as good as black and white film? And my truly honest answer, even though it sounds kind of tongue in cheek, is yes, but, or yes, and they're a different medium.
Yeah.
So they have a different feel, a different look, and a different experience. So I have created black and white digital images that I love the look of and the experience of under glass, on the frame, on my wall, as much as anything I ever shot with film. But the aesthetic is not identical. It's a different feel. But under glass, I have friends who can't tell the difference because they're not photographers, so they're not 2 inches to the glass. So really, it's about the expression of the vision and the creative experience to get there, not is this identical to a silver print. Now, if that's what you wanted, there's techniques we can do to print a digital negative out of your printer and actually produce a silver gelatin print off of it. And those, now you're getting to blend the best of both worlds. You get the digital negative and the silver gelatin print and the regular analog print. So there's ways to do it, but it's never going to be the exact same. It's different medium, it's different material. But in terms of the overall creative expression and quality, it's absolutely, I believe, can be the same experience from a viewing of the print, even though the materials are different.
That is cool. Also, I think it's interesting that I've been talking to a lot of photographers about printing lately, and most people don't seem to realize that there's a difference between the inkjet print and a photographic print. And they don't realize that labs are creating photographic prints.
Correct.
Whereas it's not just an inkjet print that looks really good. It's actually got metal embedded in the paper. Yeah. It's got silver.
Got silver in there. Yes.
Yeah, it's got silver in it, and it's it's a proven technology that lasts a long time.
Yeah.
And inkjet prints are probably going to last a long time.
Yeah, and it's one of the things the chromogenic print, or the C print, which is the kind of the traditional we use for that. The inkjet prints we have now, in a lot of ways, probably are as archival or more archival because it's pigment ink that's in there.
Right.
The silver has to be pretty well protected for that. But the other thing about those silver is that's embedded into the emulsion of the paper. Ink is sprayed on top, so that's part of that depth comes from that. And so yeah, it's a different, a completely different look. And you're absolutely right. I think a lot of photographers who go out to print, even if you print at Costco, you're getting a traditional chromogenic print. And 10 years ago, it was amazing. We had 30, 20, we probably had 15 papers to print on with chromogenic pieces, but as film has contracted, so has that. And we're now down to like 2 papers, I think. Fuji makes basically most of the papers we print on now.
Well, and as Kodak, I mean, most of the labs in America are still Kodak labs.
And they're in the one paper. And so
Endura or Fuji Crystal Archive. Yeah. Yep.
And that's what you get. And it's a great way to go. I mean, they're beautiful prints. And but if I was gonna it'd be an interesting, I'd have to test. For black and white only, you can send the black and white and have a C print made, but it's C print for color. So there is a difference in how the experience would look. It would be interesting to test that and see how I experience that.
There's a lab on the East Coast that specializes in digital black and white.
Yeah, Digital Imaging is the name of that company, and their stuff is stunning. Stacy Pearsall's Veterans Project work that's at the Smithsonian, the black and white work was done by then, and they're at the pinnacle of that game. Yeah, they're amazing.
This is all making me feel like we need to have Daniel come back and do a print show.
Just a whole print show. That'd be great, Daniel.
Oh, I would love to do that. Yeah, I just my studio. I just did my moved to a new studio in November, and it of course took longer to set up than you think it does. But yeah, I just had my first printing workshop up here at my studio this past weekend. So I had
that's great.
Up, and we learned a bunch of techniques and all that, and they printed less than I wanted, but they left happy. So that's all that really matters. But
that's awesome.
I was at Kodak the other day, and in New York, I do some work with them, and they were telling me that they feel like inkjets are better for color, like richness of color is better in an inkjet, but tonal gradations are better in C prints.
Yeah, I would absolutely.
Maybe I'm getting too far. Maybe we should do another show.
Yeah, I think so. No,
I would absolutely agree. Absolutely agree with that. And that's the thing that when people ask me to pick, like, can I tell the difference?
Mm-hmm.
I can tell the difference because just like you said, I know what to look for. If you ask me which one's a C print, which one's an inkjet print, I don't look at subject matter. I'm like, which one has better tonal gradation? The one on the left, that's the C print.
Right.
Which one has which color? Black and white. That's the Canon Epson piece. If you know what to look for, you can tell the difference between the two printers. You got to know exactly what to look for, and you've got to have trained your eye to look for it.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean one's better than the other. It just means they're a little different. Yeah. They have two different names on them. I mean, that's the other one I giggle about with photographers when they say, oh, it's not the same. I'm like, you bought a Canon 5D Mark II. Then you went and bought a Nikon D5. I'm like, they have different names. If they were the same and supposed to be the same, they would have had the same name.
That's a very valid point. Yeah.
Yeah. So stop comparing apples to apples.
It doesn't have to be the same.
Yeah.
Great.
A question came in, which reminds me that, hey, if you want to get a question in before we end and be entered, you better ask it now or leave a comment.
Yeah.
And the question is, Daniel, do you ever shoot in infrared?
I haven't. Years ago I shot in infrared film, and then I have a dear friend of mine who only shoots digital infrared. Every time he buys literally like the highest end cameras, and then they immediately go get converted.
Right.
And so I've got to shoot with the infrared, but most of my work was done back in the film days. But I love infrared black and white and infrared color both because it's a highly saturated false. Well, we call it false color, but it's the color of infrared. And it's just, I absolutely love it.
We might have to do a show on infrared, man.
It's pretty cool. And but yeah, no, I absolutely love it. On the film days, it was harder because the filter you put in front of the camera to block up all the spectrum so that only the infrared light would come through, you couldn't focus. So you had to focus. And then not only that, infrared wavelengths are shorter. Infrared wavelengths are shorter.
Longer.
They're longer. Yeah.
They're one of the
they're either shorter or longer. And so the focus of the camera was designed to focus the visible spectrum. So you had to focus, and then on your old manual lenses, there'd be this little dot that was the infrared. So you focused, and then you moved the focus point to the little dot so that the infrared would be in focus.
Wow.
But yeah, no, infrared's an amazing piece. And if you can do like springtime, if you're a landscape person, infrared in the spring when there's so much infrared coming off the new leaves, it's beautiful.
All right. Well, on that note, do you have your hat ready, Levi?
I do. My hat is ready. I'm pulling names out. And the first name is Into My.
Our last person, our person who just asked.
Yes, as well as Roger Walton. So if you guys are still here, please let us know. And let us know now by leaving another comment. And we will.
And what do they do? Now, they let us know, and then what do they do?
Yeah, first let us know. Then they just need to send me an email, levi@photofocus.com,
Yeah.
and I will send them a license for Perfectly Clear Complete version 3, which is a wonderful tool for preparing your black and whites. It doesn't, I mean, it actually has some wonderful presets for black and white in it, but I think you'll find that the way it prepares your colors and tones before you create black and white, it's a really good tool.
Cool. Well,
and
N2 is here.
All right.
Roger, are you still here? Chime in, Roger.
Roger Walton.
We hate to pick another person. That's the saddest thing we do.
So let's ask Daniel where we can catch up with him and find a workshop and whatnot.
So my website is www.danieljgregory.com, just the letter J. I
put a link at the top of the comments section on the.
Oh, I could probably do that. I think.
Oh yeah, no, Levi did already. It's good.
Okay. And then I have a podcast called The Perceptive Photographer, which is usually about 10 to 12 minutes, and it's I would say it's on the non-technical side, so I don't do gear reviews or anything like that, but it's very much on the creativity and introspection side of photography, and how do we, continue to find ourselves to be motivated to move forward with the work on that. But my workshops are all listed up on my website. I've got a perceptive workshop, photography workshop here in a couple of weeks, some alt processing ones later in the year, and I'm just getting ready to release my 2018 schedule here probably in the next month and a half, which will be up on the website.
Cool.
And then I'll be later in the summer, I'll be up on Creative Live actually doing a black and white film class for Creative Live. So if you're a Creative Live follower, I'm working out my dates right now, but I'll be up there for something on that.
Cool. Very cool.
Did Roger tune in?
Roger's in.
He's in.
Okay. Roger's here. So
Rob, all right,
we don't have to do the hat again.
No, that's great.
The hat stays on. So if you two will just send me an email at Levi@photofocus, I will send you a download link for Perfectly Clear Complete. Please give me some time.
Like 5 minutes, maybe 10. How many?
Maybe
a little more than that.
A little more than that.
All right, couple days.
Yeah.
Weeks.
It may be today.
Yeah.
Because we've got to catch up on some other things in there today. So
you're traveling a lot. So Levi, where can we find you when you're around? Where are you going?
You can always find me on photofocus.com. My articles published there. I've got 2 columns going out. The portrait tips column and also the mirrorless maniac column. I didn't tell you that. I love shooting because I'm a mirrorless maniac.
You are a maniac. That's for sure. When
I look through the viewfinder here, I see black and white photographs, and this has completely changed the way, because I actually see the world in black and white now, and I love that. So I do love setting my camera to black and white for that reason. And then I also publish other articles there, and you can find me on Instagram at PhotoLevi. And if you really want some adventure, I'm teaching in Montana next month at 9 Quarter Circle Ranch. So go to 9quartercircle.com, NINE quarter, QUARTER, circle.com.
I looked that up after our last month's hangout, and I was ready.
Oh, it's going to be great. It's going to be so cool.
What's happening? What's happening during that time?
Well, we're going to be in the Teton neighborhood for the eclipse.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
We're going to drive down and find a great spot to try and make some kind of picture that's unique with the eclipse. And those are my old stomping. I grew. That's right. I grew up there, I feel like. And so I'm excited. Plus, there's horseback riding, fly fishing instruction, photography instruction. We're going to have it's a new moon during the eclipse, so we're going to have some great night skies. I reckon I'm not going to sleep for a week. It's going to be great. That's right. And I hope you guys, it's so cool. My family went and stayed there recently, and we think you should come join us.
Yeah.
So check that out at 9quartercircle.com. Gary Scott says, when are we doing another event in PDX? On Wednesday, Gary, we are doing maybe a little bit of walking. Actually, Abe Curlin from B&H is coming out and intersecting with my club night, and I haven't told him this yet, but we're supposed to go photograph some waterfalls or somethings out here. So
what else do you do out there? Waterfalls.
Yeah, I mean, there's waterfalls, and there's there's waterfalls. There's Coast, which has waterfalls on it, and
moss.
And moss. Yeah. So anyway,
lots of ferns.
Lots of ferns. Come join me in Montana or in Portland sometime. Look me up. We'll do a photo walk. Awesome. Rob, what about you?
Well, I'm going to be a photo focus. My Lightroom column. I'm actually getting into a rhythm.
It's in.
Pigs are flying.
Tuesday mornings.
Yeah. I also started writing once a week for Lightroom Killer Tips. I've done some stuff for them too, so some more Lightroom stuff.
Excellent.
Yeah, and then just kind of enjoying a little bit of the summer that we have left. I'll actually done. Yeah, I think I'll be in New York at Adorama doing a thing with Wacom Mobile Studio Pro in Lightroom and Photoshop.
Oh, right on.
In the end of August. But beyond that, my semester starts, and I'll probably just be around.
Wow. Right on.
All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in with us, spending another hour-ish learning about Lightroom and Photoshop and everything in between photography. Daniel, you are awesome. Thank you so much. We definitely need to book a print show. We haven't done print in a while. And an infrared show. I'm gonna have to get my camera converted before we do that.
I might have to call you for a podcast on infrared, Daniel. That'd be all right.
All right. Yeah. That'd be good.
All right. Well, take care, you guys. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next month.
All right. See ya.
Thanks.